Hello and welcome to Dadsplained with me, the Unhinged Father. If you were looking for a well-mannered dad giving you tame, reverent advice, maybe slightly witty, you are in definitely the wrong fucking place. But if you were looking for a slightly unhinged look at life, fatherhood, finances, mental health, or anything else that I deem worthy, then welcome in. Let's have some fun. This week I asked a couple people within my office for their ideas on some of the prompts that they think that I should be talking about here on the podcast. And they gave me a couple of ones, and there were a few that stood out that I think this week would be based on. The first one of them is kind of a heavier topic, but was related to childhood trauma and how we can prevent from passing that along to our children. This one's definitely a tough one, especially nowadays. I just feel like every social media expert or psychologist is always talking about how there's so much trauma in our lives. Everyone's traumatized, and we're constantly just, bending over backwards for people and saying that it's okay what you do. Your behavior is totally acceptable because you have this trauma in your life. And I'm someone who's of the mindset of thinking that we all do have trauma in our life, and parents do pass down trauma to their children. I think that generational trauma is 100% something that is real. I've seen it through, my own life, and then also through my wife's life. It's very pronounced, from grandma down to mom, down to her, these traumas that are passed along. That being said, when we discuss trauma, I like to refer to them as big T trauma and little t trauma, in terms of like the everyday traumas and mental, psychological trauma that we receive as children versus, someone who goes to war and gets their fucking leg blown off is, I would call that a big T trauma. Something that I wanted to touch upon today was go through my ideas on, how we can, I don't think you completely eliminate trauma from children, right? There's no way. They're going to have hardships. They're going to have, like, you're gonna fuck up. It's gonna happen inevitably. If you don't, then you could come on my podcast and tell me what the fuck I need to do. But everyone is gonna mess up. We're gonna pass along trauma to our children. My thoughts are, how can we reduce that trauma within our children, and how can we help them to cope with that trauma better, how to process it. I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that not only is the trauma inflicted, but children are never taught how to accept it, to understand it, and then to process it in a healthy way. Me personally, I've experienced my fair share of lowercase t trauma throughout my life. I had a pretty good childhood, right? Me and my brothers and sister, we grew up in a middle class family. Wanted for anything. Grew up in a volatile household at certain times, and there are certain things now that have, going to counseling, especially going to counseling with my wife, and kind of diving deeper into why we are the way that we are. You go back to yourself as a kid and you see how you've developed all of these, I guess you could say, defense mechanisms or procedures that you do within your life. And a lot of times they were developed when you were a child and you did them for a certain reason, but you end up outgrowing them. And even though they were productive or helpful at a certain point in your life, they no longer serve you in the way that you intended them to. So that's something to always kind of be looking back on. And I think that it took me a long time to understand this and really kind of dissect I am the way that I am. And like I said before, in previous episodes, being uncomfortable, being in a situation where you're outside of your comfort zone, those are all things that help you grow. But just because you grow doesn't always mean that it's positive as well, right? You can be in a traumatic environment when you're a child And that will make you grow. You will learn, you will start to do things differently, but that doesn't always mean that it's going to be in your best interest to follow that path. And so I think one of the biggest things we can do for our children is to encourage them to do self reflection, to look inward and see what it is that they're doing, why they're doing it, and then is that still serving them today? Now, something I also see today is this instant reaction to come down on your parents. And when I see people have these interactions with their parents where they are confronting them or discussing, the traumas that they had in their past, they are coming at it from a position of anger and blaming and all of these other things that really just charge the situation and make the parents be like, you ungrateful little dick, like I did everything for you. And both can be true at the same time, right? That child could have had trauma within their life, and that parent could have given up everything for that child and tried their damn best to do everything for them. About it is taking yourself out of the charged environment, that charged mindset. You really don't want to be coming into a situation and having a discussion with a parent where you're like, I'm just going to fucking light them up for everything that they did wrong. That's not going to end well. You're both going to be angry, and it's just going to do damage to the relationship that you have. If you're able to kind of come at it from a neutral mindset and be like, hey, this happened, and yeah, it sucked, but I'm not blaming you for it. Like, I can understand why you did this, and I know that you tried your best, but I need to make sure that I'm also expressing some of the issues that I have now, things that happened in my past, kind of for closure, essentially, right? It's a way for you to make closure with this, process it, and then move on. But out there, we all think that we're going to do better and that we're not going to be like our parents. They didn't know what they were doing. They fucked us up. Guess what? We're all going to fuck our kids up. That's just kind of how every generation goes. I used to joke about, like, when I would tell my parents or whoever gives me unsolicited advice on raising my kid, it's like, listen, I don't want to fuck my kids up the way you fucked them up. I want to fuck my kids up in my own way. Say that we're going to intentionally do something to make our kids miserable. We are going to try our best as parents, but inevitably we're human and we're going to mess up. It's going to happen. So for me, I look more so for the repair aspect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to do something that's going to cause trauma to what can I do to repair and to show them use it as a learning moment. We all mess up, but we can all apologize for our mistakes and we can all try to repair. And I think that repair aspect is the part that's missing parents and kids, but that's also missing in society. I feel like there's a reason why so much division between, politics, race, economic, whatever you want to, whatever division you want to put in there, it's out of control these days. Part of that is because we're not learning how to do the repair aspect of relationships. It's almost like you said something I don't like, or you caused me some sort of hurt. Up, that bridge is burned. We are never going to be friends again, and you're a terrible person. By teaching this to our children, we can ensure a better place. Just a story is an example of something that happened to me personally, and it's nothing big, nothing crazy. I'm not going to talk about nuts like sexual abuse or like super bad physical abuse or anything like that. But here's just an example of something that I've kind of discovered throughout counseling and looking back on my life, me, and helped kind of shape the person that I've become. And my mom tells this story a jovial sense, like it's funny, and to some extent it is, but if you think of it from the perspective of a 5-year-old, it could definitely be traumatizing and shape the way that you build relationships moving forward. I was a little kid, and I don't know, like 9 or 10 in the morning, and I wanted a popsicle because obviously I did. I was a fucking 4 or 5-year-old, and I had a sweet tooth. I don't know what the hell my mom was doing, but probably on the phone or something. And I went into the garage, grabbed the popsicle and then brought it in, and if I can have it, got upset that I came in with the popsicle and had grabbed it, took it from me, and then bonked me on the head with it and said that I couldn't have it. And that bad to get bonked on the head and put it back, but just that rejection and that safety of going to the person that's supposed to be their safe space, and then having a want or a need, asking for that want or need to be met, and then when you're asking for it, receiving physical pain, physical punishment for that want or need. That kid that it's not okay to have needs, that you're not allowed to have wants, needs, and if you do, you'll be met with physical for that. So that's just kind of a small example of something that did me and it kind of changed the way that I form relationships. My now attachment people has changed because of that. A small example of something that happened to me personally that I would call like a small T, something that's really, you wouldn't really think much of, right? I'm sure that my mom didn't think about that when this happened when I was a little kid, and that the end of the world, I didn't become like a serial killer after that, and like I didn't all of a sudden start, listening to a bunch of emo records and a pack of cigs a day, but it still had an impact, a long lasting one that does have impacts to this day on how I form relationships and how I trust people. That can kind of lead to trauma, and something that we don't really think much about is, and they have these irrational fears. It's not something that we kind of, sometimes it could be really annoying. Don't get me wrong, right? When like the kid won't go to sleep because he's afraid of, I don't know, Big Bad Bunny, or he's afraid of our garden. These types of things happen, and it's very easy, especially when you're tired or you've got other shit to do, to kind of overreact and just be like, listen, your fears are irrational, go to sleep, or just go do this, and to essentially force them to comply. And I don't want to sit there and make people feel bad about it, but especially with one of my friends in particular, with her parents when she was a kid, she was similar to me. I was a scared little kid. She was scared as well. I have seen, for example, she tells the story of when she was in the ocean, and she was fearful that she was going to die because, she like got swept up by a wave. And when her dad tells the story, it was nothing crazy. Like, she literally watched her, she was okay, and nothing was going to happen to her. It was like a small little wave. But her explanation of it is that she had this immense fear, and the reaction from her dad was he essentially at this, he was laughing at her for her fear. And what that says to a child is that your fear is irrational, your fear is silly, and your fear is not okay, necessarily a good thing to have, right? We don't want kids that are going to grow up and just be afraid of everything, and you don't necessarily need to validate the actual fear. You can tell them like, hey, there's nothing to be afraid of, you don't have anything to fear here, you were safe the entire time I was watching you. But you can validate, like, but I can understand why that would be so scary for you. And just having that little bit of validation can do wonders for a kid, right? It's okay to be afraid. Like, when we're adults, we have irrational fears. Like, I'm still afraid of fucking heights. I'm not a big fan of spiders in general. We have things that we have as adults that we are afraid of, and we don't have the overactive imagination or the just complete ignorance of children who don't know what's truly safe and what's not. They're really trying to learn. And so I don't want to give my children this to fear, or it's not even an inability to fear, because we all still have fear. It's more so of just like this false sense of bravado we're not afraid of anything. And I think that that can be really damaging to children. I think that the way to go about it is to acknowledge the fear and say that you understand that emotional side of it, right? That you understand the feeling of the fear, but then also expressing a sense of safety to them. Like, you are truly safe, you're okay, you're not in any danger, but I do understand that. So that's just something that I've kind of out and I've seen, and I do struggle with it with my own kids, like I said. So if you've done this, like, I'm not sitting here shaming you, fucking better parent. I mean, I am telling you to be a better parent, but do better in the future. We can't go back and change the past. So, like I said before, repair is also a good thing as well. If you do find yourself down on your kids when they're afraid, then you can always go back and you can repair and you can let them know that, hey, mom or dad made a mistake and we do see the fear, we understand, and we're sorry that we made you feel that way. It's okay to say sorry to your kids. That doesn't mean that you're acquiescing to all of their needs or wants, treating them like they're an actual person as opposed to just a little minion for you to control. A couple of things that we've deemed would potentially cause some trauma for children, the parents can do. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to go over things that are not going to cause trauma to children, or not the type of trauma that we're really talking about here. So, not telling you're telling your kids they can't do something, having a bedtime, having routine, not letting them fucking hit other people or just eat ice cream for dinner every night. Things that are not going to cause trauma, right? I don't want people to confuse trauma or regular trauma with just regular boundaries or discipline, right? You have to tell your children what they can and can't do. You can take their input into it, but ultimately the job of a parent is to keep their kids safe and then to teach them right from wrong and how to live a good life. To do that, you need to set boundaries with them. Kind of explain it to people is like, what do you think a child would be more happy to do, right? If you just gave them a bunch of sports equipment and said, here's a bunch of sports equipment and here's a field, go do whatever the fuck you want, right? They're going to end up doing is just picking flowers and not playing any games or, whatever it is. But if you were to put a children with the sports equipment and the field and say, like, hey, here's the rules of the game, here's the structure, you are free to do what you want within the confines of the game, giving them freedom, but you're also giving them the structure that they need and they crave, and they will end up being able to play the game better. They were not given any instruction whatsoever. So I don't want people to think like, I can't, discipline my child. I can't no, I can't do, you can't get angry with them. These are all things that are okay and things that are going to happen. I think it's just trying to hold two things in place at once, right? Seeing your side of it and being a parent, but then also just trying to understand where the child's coming from as well. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier today about generational trauma, and I definitely wanted to touch base with you on that as well and kind of give you my perspective on that. To me, generational trauma is definitely something that is very prominent in today's society. Uh, it starts with great grandma, down to grandma, down to mom, down to daughter, down to granddaughter. And really what it is more so generational baggage. These are the things that are passed down through the generations. And, we can definitely have a positive side to the generational baggage. To me, those would be called traditions. We definitely have traditions that are passed down from our family members that we take on and we continue to perpetuate with our own families. But the trauma is also something that can be perpetuated as well. And those are things that we need to be aware of and things that we need to try to minimize in the future. I see it recently in an example, family, grandma really likes things done a certain way. And when grandma comes over everyone has to make sure everything is perfect. The mom does that as well. Every time grandma comes over, everything has to be perfect in the house. And then the daughter starts to do that, right? Anytime her mom comes over, everything in the house needs to be perfect. It's like you're perpetuating this feel of perfection to certain standards, and it can create these hardships for people moving forward to where they don't feel like they can be their true selves. And so it's kind of passed down from one generation to the next, and that can be a really great thing, but some of the really shitty stuff can be passed down as well. And that's something that we need to be conscious of. And while I don't think that it's a good idea to completely shun the advice of the older generations, like we're obviously here, we're doing all right, and even though we may have issues with how we were raised, that they can, but there are certain things that they do that we can change, right? I think it's picking and choosing the best things that they did and keeping those, and then looking for those generational trauma lines and then trying to stop them. Things that we need to be conscious of and try to make changes with them. I personally think that this generation is more inclined to make those changes and stop that generational trauma. But the negative part of that is that we also are more inclined to just completely disassociate ourselves with our family. And that's also not a good place to be. We need that generational connection, and family is extremely important. It'll help children grow up in a kind of a well balanced environment, and having that connection to family is super important to children. They're going to connect to something. They need leadership, they need guidance, and if they're not getting it from the family, from their parents, they're going to turn to peers or to teachers or to someone else. And that is a scary fucking thought, especially if you've seen what they teach nowadays in school. You should be fucking mortified. So for me, I want to make sure that my children are connected to the family and that they want to learn from us, but at the same time, stopping any of that negative cycle that drives itself into our lives on an everyday basis, calling it out and setting boundaries. That's really the best thing that we can do. I did have a book recommendation for everyone as well. Reading is, I was never a big reader, and I just started getting into reading again this year with the birth of my youngest son, and I think that it's really been helpful. I'm at about 50 books this year read since the beginning of the year, and I'm going to continue going down that path because I think that having good input coming in is super, super beneficial. So the recommendation I have is kind of in line with what we talked about today. It's a book called Hold Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. It's by Gabor Mate and Gordon Newfield. It's been pretty eye-opening. Most of the child psychology books that I've read, or like parenting books that I've read, are always just kind of like, let your kids do what they want, and you need to make sure that you're always in tune with their feelings and all of these other things, which I think there's some good information in there as well. But when every fucking book says the same thing, and a lot of times is just pushing for giving your children more freedom, the can get a little overwhelming with parents and can be definitely taken out of context and lead to bad parenting. It really was more so about how crave connection and attachment, and they're going to attach to someone, and even though parents are always trying to push their kids to like think independently or to play independently, that children don't know what the fuck they're doing, and they're going to need someone to lean on, to learn from. And if you're not the one that they're doing it with, it's going to be their friends or it's going to be teachers, like I said before. And in this book, he talks about how attachment is something that's driving not only children to not have the best behavior, but also kind of driving society in a little bit of a shitty spiral. Blind leading the blind, and the lack of a family community or strong parenting, parents both going to work, which, hey, me and my wife, we both go to work, and our kids, Declan is in uh, daycare right now, Montessori, and our other son is, being watched by nanny slash grandma. We get that, but we still try to make sure that we have a very solid connection with them and that we're always rely on us. We want them to basically need us more than they need other people. And that's really the way, at least in the opinion of this book, that it should be. And so that's just kind of a very basic overview of what they go into. It's definitely a little bit more of a dense book and not necessarily like a super easy read in terms of, it's not like witty or anything like that. It's really more, it's written by a PhD and an MD. So you could just kind of take it from there. But it's definitely a good book, a good read, and I think especially in this environment, this society that we're in, definitely some good information in there, and I would highly recommend it. And finally, that brings me to a bit of a rant this morning, getting a little unhinged here. In line with this show about childhood trauma, things like that. Something that I've been seeing very, more of a recent phenomena, but I think it's been going on for a while, is just this this idea that children know what they want and that we should let children make decisions for themselves, and they know exactly what they're going to be, and that we don't need to or control them, quote unquote control them. And it's just complete horseshit. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be giving our children freedom, but the freedom of the decisions that we should be giving them is like, hey, do you want to wear your Paw Patrol t-shirt today, or do you want to wear your pumpkin t-shirt today? And let them make that decision for themselves. Or like, do you want to wear your Nikes today, or do you want to wear your Adidas? Do you want cereal or toast for breakfast, right? These are the decisions and the freedoms that we can give children, and that will help them learn to make decisions when they're growing older. Something that we can't let our children do is just make life altering decisions when they're, fucking 3, 4, 5 years old, even all the way up until they're 16, 17, 18, right? I had no clue what the fuck I was going to do when I was older. And if I made certain decisions when I was younger, based on where my mindset was and what I didn't know, I would have completely fucked my life up, right? I mean, constantly saying like I'm a pirate, or I'm a monster truck, or I'm a Jack Skellington, I'm all of these things, right? These are all just things that he's pretending to be. And we can play along with him, but like we don't like affirm him in any of those things as well. He doesn't want to eat broccoli, and that's not necessarily saying that by me making him eat broccoli that I'm traumatizing him and not giving him freedom. Being a parent means that you help raise and guide your children. And even though children know more than we give them credit for in some aspects, they also know a lot less than people are giving them credit for now. You can't allow children to make decisions when they're that young without any guidance. And sometimes you have to tell them no, you have to set boundaries. So I just find it hilarious that, especially in this society now with like social media, where people are like, you need to set boundaries. Fuck these people. They can't tell me what to do. And then at the same token, they're like, you need to let your children decide. You need to let your children make that decision. And they know what's best for them. They don't know what's best for them, right? I joke that children are, when you become a parent, you literally get a puppy, but like a puppy that's constantly trying to fucking kill itself, because they stick shit in their mouth when they're babies. They eat stuff. They'll like, if you leave Windex out, they'll fucking drink it, right? Children don't know what the fuck they're doing. It's your job to teach them. So do a good job, teach them, set boundaries, and set them up to where when they are at the position to where they can make decisions, they know how to process that information and actually make the goddamn decision. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And it's just, it all goes back to this thing where for me, I think the problem is that children deserve innocence. And I've heard people talk about how, children aren't innocent, and they'll point to examples of, different things that kids do when they're younger, and that's all horseshit. Kids are innocent, they're ignorant, and they deserve that. Children deserve to be innocent for longer. We constantly hear people talk about how, like, oh, that 13-year-old looks like she's, an adult. She doesn't look like she's 13. Well, it's because the age of innocence is gone, right? With social media and all of this stuff being just, spewed out in front of them, and they're bombarded with all of these pictures of and sexuality and whatever else they're like hit with. That age of innocence, it dies very quickly when you are given all of this information. And not to get biblical on anyone, but it's kind of similar to the story of Adam and Eve. When do they lose their innocence? When do they become ashamed? When do they have guilt? It's when they eat from the tree of knowledge, and they have all of their innocence and their ignorance is taken from them. They become ashamed, they put on clothes, they hide, have this knowledge now. And similar to the tree of knowledge, social media, the internet, all of that stuff, that's our tree of knowledge. And by giving free access to our children, that we're essentially taking away their innocence. So for me, fuck off. Let the kids have their innocence. They can be little kids for as long as they want. Let my kids be little kids, to have their innocence, to have their ignorance for as long as I possibly can, because I think that they deserve that. And I think that they'll be served better in the future by holding on to that until they're ready to process the information that's out there. Conclude this week's episode. I hope that you really enjoyed it. Shout out to my number one fans, all three of them, Casey, Jonah, and Haley, the only three people that listening to this podcast. Some suggestions, and Casey won out this week with her suggestion on childhood trauma. So again, thank you for those suggestions. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Definitely feel free to send any feedback that you may have to the email posted in the show notes, and definitely feel free to share this podcast with anyone that you feel may be benefited by it, or anyone that you just seriously dislike and want to piss them off by spamming their email. Either way, it's all good to me. Other than that, hope that y'all have a great day. Try hard, do your best.